The rain had been falling since the 3rd hour past noon, a thin, cold rain that did not so much soak the earth as wear it down, and by the time the light began to fail over the western hills of the Aldworth Valley, the road that ran past Aldric Fenn's farm had become a black scar of mud through fields that smelled of rotting hay. Aldric stood in the open doorway of his small stone house, a tin cup of bitter chicory in his hand, and he watched the road the way a man watches a wound he is not sure has stopped bleeding. He had stood that way every evening for nearly 2 years now, ever since the army had given him back his name and taken away everything else, and most evenings the road gave him nothing in return. The sheep huddled under the lean-to. The single goat tugged at a frayed rope. The crows came home to the dead oak at the field's edge and quarrelled themselves to silence. That was the shape of his days. That had been the shape of his days. Until tonight. She came out of the rain like something the rain itself had made. He saw her first as a shoulder of darkness moving against the lighter darkness of the road, a shape too tall and too steady to be one of the village drunks stumbling home, too silent to be a peddler with his cart. She walked the way a wounded animal walks when it knows it is being followed and refuses to fall. Each step placed with a soldier's careful economy, the head lowered, the hand pressed flat against the side, as if holding something inside the ribs that wanted to come out. Aldric set the tin cup down on the doorpost. He did not reach for the sword behind the door. Not yet. He had learned, in 9 years of campaigns and 3 of marching home, that the people who wore weapons openly were rarely the ones you needed to fear. The ones to fear were the ones who came smiling, with empty hands and an officer's commission folded in their coat. When she stepped into the wash of yellow lamplight that spilled from his doorway, he understood what she was, and his throat closed around a single dry swallow. An orc. A woman. Tall as a tall man, broader through the shoulder than he was. Her skin the muted dark grey-green of wet slate at dusk. Not the bright colour the alehouse stories painted, but something quieter and older, like stone that had remembered being alive. A long black braid lay heavy over her left shoulder, beaded at the end with what looked like bone. Her eyes were the colour of dark amber, and they held his without challenge and without apology, only with a terrible, exhausted attention, as if she had walked 100 miles for the single purpose of looking at him now. 2 small ivory tusks showed at the corners of her lower lip when she breathed. Her brow was heavy, and beneath it her face was drawn tight with cold and with something else. Something that he, who had served 11 seasons under 3 captains and 1 bad king, recognized at once. He had worn that look himself, the morning after Halford's Ford, when he had walked among the bodies of his friends and could not remember any of their names. She was carrying a bundle inside her cloak, a bundle she held the way one holds a thing that is more precious than one's own breath, and the cloak, where it pressed against her right side, was black with a wetness that was not rain. She stopped 6 paces from his door. She did not speak. She drew, slowly, with 2 fingers, the short sword from the leather sheath at her left hip, and she turned the blade in her hand so that the hilt pointed toward him and the point lay flat across her own open palm. She knelt. The mud took her knee without sound. She held the sword up to him like a thing being given back to a god, and her amber eyes never left his face. "Farmer," she said. Her voice was low, and the Orcish accent in it was soft, almost worn away. "I am laying down my steel. I am asking for the roof of your house, for 1 night, for me and for the thing I am carrying. In the morning I will go. If you say no, I will go now, and I will not trouble you. But before you say anything, look at me. Look at me and remember that I came to your door with the edge of my blade away from your throat." Aldric Fenn, who had not been afraid in a long time because there had been very little left in him capable of fear, found that his hand on the doorpost was shaking. He did not answer her at once. The army had taught him many things, most of them useless in a farmer's life. But one of the useful ones was this. A man who speaks before he has thought is a man who has already chosen, and the choice is rarely his own. So he stood in his doorway and he looked at her, the way she had asked him to, and he counted slowly to 10 inside his head while the rain ran off the eaves and made a small pewter sound on the stone step. She did not move while he counted. The blade stayed flat across her palm. The bundle stayed pressed against her ribs. The blood beneath her cloak did not stop seeping, and a single dark drop fell from the hem of the wool into the mud and was gone. "Get up," he said. She did not. "Get up," he said again, and now his voice was the voice he had used in the regiment when he was a corporal, and not yet anything more, the voice that did not ask. "I am not a lord, and you are not my prisoner. If you kneel in my mud one more breath, I will leave you out here for the wolves. Get up and come in." She rose. He saw the small white tightening at the corner of her mouth when she rose, and he knew the wound in her side was bad, and he knew also that she would not have told him so even if he had asked. He stepped back from the doorway. He did not take the sword from her. He understood, somewhere beneath the surface of his thinking, that the sword was not a gift he was meant to accept. It was a promise she was making to herself, and to take it from her would be to make himself part of the promise, and he was not ready for that. She came inside. She had to duck her head under the lintel. In his small front room, with its low beams and its single iron lamp and its smell of old smoke and onions, she looked too large, too other, like a piece of weather that had wandered indoors by mistake. She crossed to the long pine table and she laid the short sword down upon it, very gently, the way you lay a sleeping child. The bundle inside her cloak made a small sound. Not a cry, a breath. A small wet breath, the kind a creature makes when it is alive and warm and does not yet know that the world has teeth. Aldric heard it. His eyes went to her chest and the question rose in him, and he did not yet ask it. There were rules to hospitality, even hospitality given to a stranger out of the rain, even hospitality given to an orc, and one of the rules was that you fed the guest before you questioned them. So he turned away from her. He went to the hearth and he stirred the banked coals, and he set a small iron pot of yesterday's barley over the fire to warm. He cut a thick wedge of brown bread. He poured a clay cup of his own thin ale. When he turned back, she was sitting on the bench by the table, and her cloak was open, and she was looking down into it, and her face had become a thing he could not read. "Eat," he said. He set the bread and the cup down in front of her. "Then I will look at your side. I know a little. I am no surgeon, but I can stop a hole." "The side is not what matters," she said. "It matters to you, or you would not be holding it. It matters less than what I am carrying." He sat down on the opposite bench. The table between them was a hand's breadth of pine wood and several lifetimes of distance. The lamp burned low. The rain hammered. He laid his own scarred hands flat on the wood, palms down, in a gesture his old captain had used to use, a gesture that meant, "I am not reaching for anything. Speak to me. Then tell me," he said, "what you are carrying." She did not tell him, not in words. She slowly, very slowly, drew aside the inner fold of her dark wool cloak, and the lamplight fell on what she had been hiding. And Aldric Fenn, who had buried his own newborn son with his own hands in a winter very much like this 3 years ago, made a small sound in his throat that he could not, afterward, remember making. The child in her arms was perhaps 2 months old. The child was not an orc. The child was not a human, not entirely. The child had skin the warm colour of pale river clay, and a faint shadow of grey beneath the eyes, and the smallest beginning of 2 ivory points where the lower gums had not yet broken. The child was asleep and breathing, and so small inside the wool of her cloak that it seemed less a child than the idea of a child, held inside the body of a warrior who had been bleeding for 2 days. "Her name," the orc woman said, "is what I will not say tonight. Tonight she does not have a name. Tonight she is only the thing I am keeping alive. Do you understand me, farmer?" Aldric understood her. He understood her the way one wounded creature understands another in a dark wood. He understood her, and he reached across the table and took the cup of ale and pushed it closer to her hand, and he said the only thing that there was to say. "You will stay," he said, "until the child is strong. After that, we will see." She would not let him touch the child. She would not let him touch her side, either, until she had drunk the ale and eaten half the bread and watched him for a long quarter of an hour with the steady attention of a creature, deciding whether the man across the table was the kind of man who might, in the small hour before dawn, smother an infant in its sleep for the bounty on its head. He let her watch him. He went about the small business of his evening. He banked the fire higher. He brought in the last armful of dry, kindling from the lean-to. He set water to boil. He did not ask her name. She did not offer it. The sword lay between them on the table, and neither of them touched it. At last, when the rain had thinned to a slow drip and the small front room had become almost warm, she shifted the child to the crook of her left arm and she said, "There is clean linen in my pack, the brown roll beneath the bread. Bring it." He brought it. She handed him the child. He did not know, afterward, why she did it. Perhaps it was the look on his face when he saw the small grey shadow beneath the infant's eyes. Perhaps it was something a warrior recognizes in another wounded thing, some old soldier's instinct that says, "This man has carried something small and dying before. His hands know the shape of it." He took the child. The child weighed almost nothing. The child opened its eyes for an instant, eyes that were already the dark amber of the orc woman's eyes, and looked at him without interest or fear, and closed them again. Aldric Fenn, who had not held an infant in 3 years and 7 months, sat down very carefully on the bench and held this one as if any movement of his arms might cause it to dissolve into the lamplight. The orc woman, on the other bench, opened her cloak and her leather armour at the right side, and Aldric did not look at her while she did it because he understood that she did not want to be looked at. He heard the small wet sounds of cloth being peeled from a wound. He heard her breath catch once, very softly, and then steady. He heard the soft slide of water in the basin and the slow tear of clean linen being bitten through by her teeth. When she spoke again, her voice was different, looser, as if the act of looking at her own injury had freed something in her. "2 arrows, she said. 3 days back. One came out clean. The other broke when I cut it free. There is wood in me still." "How far in?" "Not far. I can feel the end of it. I cannot reach it with one hand." "In the morning," he said, and he was surprised at how steady his own voice was. "In the morning I will reach it. I have done it before, for myself, once for a horse." "A horse," she said, and there was no humour in her voice, but the corner of her mouth moved, and he understood that under any other sky, in any other life, she might have laughed. "The horse lived," he said. "That is a comfort to me, farmer." He looked down at the child in his arms. The child made the small wet breath again. He understood, with a cold, quiet certainty that settled into him the way a stone settles into the bottom of a still pond, that he had been chosen. Not by her. By something larger and colder than her, by whatever it was that arranged the meetings of strangers on rainy nights at the ends of forgotten roads. He had been chosen to keep this child alive. He did not know yet what the child was. He did not need to know. He had been a corporal in a regiment that had lost 2 of every 3 men at Harford's Ford, and he had crawled 4 miles in a frozen ditch with a boy from his village on his back, and the boy had died anyway, and Aldric had not been the same man afterward. But he had learned one thing from that crawl, one thing that had lasted. You do not get to choose what you carry. You only get to choose whether you set it down. He was not going to set this down. "What do I call you?" he said, still looking at the child, "since you will not name her tonight?" The orc woman was silent so long that he thought she would not answer. Then she said, "Merca, Merca Varek. It is a true name. I give it to you because if the men who are following me find this house, you will need a name to give them, and a true one is harder to forget than a false one." "Aldric Fenn," he said, "discharged corporal, 2nd Regiment of the Marches, 2 years out. No one is following me. That much I can offer." "That much," she said, is more than I have offered anyone in a long time." Outside, the last of the rain stopped. The drip from the eaves slowed. Somewhere far off down the valley, a dog barked once and was silent. Inside the small stone house, a fire burned low, and a sword lay on a pine table, and a man who had buried one child held another in his arms, and an orc woman with 2 arrows' worth of pain in her side pressed clean linen against her ribs and breathed slow and waited for morning. Morning came thin and grey, the sky the colour of old pewter, the fields silvered with the last of the rain. Aldric was up before dawn, as he always was. He stoked the fire. He milked the goat. He carried in fresh water from the well. He did all of this the way he always did, with the slow, careful attention of a man who has learned that small chores done well are the rope a person uses to climb out of every dark place he has ever been in. When he came back into the front room with the milk pail in his hand, Mirka Varric was awake. She was sitting upright on the bench. The child was asleep against her chest, wrapped in a fresh strip of his own grey linen. The wound in her side had a clean white dressing across it. She had done it herself, in the night, while he slept 4 feet away on the floor by the hearth. "You did not sleep," he said. "I slept enough. Enough for what?" "Enough to know," she said, "that you did not get up and ride for the watch." He set the pail down. He looked at her for a long moment. He understood, then, what she had been doing all night, sitting upright on the bench. She had been listening for him, for his breathing to change, for his weight to shift on the floor, for the small particular sound a man makes when he is going to betray a guest. She had been ready, in the dark, all those hours, to kill him if he tried. He did not hold it against her. He had been a corporal. He understood it perfectly. "I will look at the wood in your side now," he said, "before the child wakes." "After," she said. "First, listen." He listened. At first he heard only the wind in the dead oak. Then, slowly, like a thing rising out of deep water, he heard it. Hooves. Several sets of hooves. Coming up the valley road. Not fast. The careful, deliberate, sweeping pace of riders who were searching, not pursuing. Mirka's amber eyes went flat. Her free hand moved toward the sword on the table. "No," Aldric said quietly. "No. Put it away. Put it under the bench. Take the child into the back room. Lie down. Pull the blanket to your chin. If they come in, you are my sister-in-law. You came from the South Country. Your husband is dead. You are sick with the lung fever. They will not come close to you. No one comes close to the lung fever." She did not move. Her eyes stayed on him. He saw her thinking. He saw her weighing him on a scale he could feel, even though he could not see it. He spoke to her plainly, the way he had spoken to her last night, because plainness was the only currency he had. "Mirka Varric," he said, "if I were going to give you up, I would have done it in the dark. There is no reward for an orc woman after sunrise. Sunrise is the hour of farmers, not of bounty hunters. Go. Into the back room. Now." She went. She went without a word, the child against her chest, the sword vanishing under the bench in a single soundless motion as she passed. The door of the back room closed. Aldric heard the small creak of the rope bed. Then nothing. He went outside. He stood in front of his house with the empty milk pail in his hand, the way any farmer stands in front of his house when riders come up the road. He set his face into the shape it had worn in the regiment when officers had asked him questions to which the true answer would have hanged him. A face slightly puzzled, slightly slow, slightly bored, the face of a man who has nothing to hide because he has nothing in him interesting enough to hide. 4 riders, light mail under dark cloaks, long swords. The lead rider was a thin man with a thin red beard and the small silver pin of a private commission at his throat. Not the king's men, then. Worse. A private company, the kind that hunted heads for coin and did not have to write reports afterward. They drew up at the foot of his yard. The lead rider did not dismount. "Farmer," he said. "My lord," Aldric said. He did not say my lord well. He said it the way a man says it when he has been forced to all his life and has never gotten the music of it right. We are looking for an orc, a woman, tall, wounded, possibly carrying a small bundle. She came up this road in the night. She did not pass through Aldworth village. Have you seen her? Aldric scratched his chin slowly with the back of his hand. He let the question hang in the cold morning air, the way a man lets a heavy stone hang from a rope before he puts it down. He looked at the 4 riders, and he saw what they were. Men who had killed enough people to be tired of it, but not enough to be sick of it. The dangerous middle stage. The stage where killing one more is the same as killing none. "No, my lord," he said. "You are certain? I have been awake since 4th bell. I came out for the milk 3 times. I saw nothing on the road but the rain stopping." The thin, red-bearded man looked at him a long time. Aldric let him look. Inside the house, behind the back room door, an infant did not cry. An orc woman did not breathe. The whole valley held its breath in the cold pewter morning, and Aldric Fenn, discharged corporal, stood in the mud of his own yard and lied to 4 armed men with a face like a turned-over field. "If you see her," the thin man said at last, "you will ride to Aldworth and tell the captain at the inn. There is silver in it. 40 crowns of silver. Do not approach her. She has already killed 3 of our company." 40 crowns, Aldric said slowly, and he let his slow farmer's face brighten with slow farmer's greed. 40. I will keep my eyes on the road, my lord. I will sleep with one open. The thin man's mouth curled at one corner. He thought he had bought a man for 40 crowns. He turned his horse. The 4 riders went on up the valley road at the same careful sweeping pace, and Aldric Fenn watched them until they were small as crows against the grey hills. And then he went inside, and he closed the door, and he leaned his forehead against the wood, and he shook for a long time before he could move again. Winter came down the valley in the next week. It came the way it always came in Aldworth, not in a single storm, but in a slow, sullen gathering, a colder wind each night, a thinner frost each dawn, until one morning the puddles in the yard had grown small grey lids of ice, and the sheep would not leave the lean-to without a stick. Aldric closed the shutters of the front windows. He cut more wood than he needed and stacked it against the north wall. He went into Aldworth village only once, on the 2nd market day, and he bought small things. Salt, a little flour, a length of soft cloth he told the woolwife was for a doll for his niece, an iron needle, a paper twist of feverfew. He came home before dark. He did not stop at the inn. Mirka healed. She healed the way a creature like her healed, which was to say slowly at first, and then, once a certain corner had been turned, with an animal speed that astonished him. The piece of broken arrow shaft had come out of her side on the 2nd morning by the kitchen lamp, while she gripped the underside of the table with one hand and did not make a sound. He had pulled it out with the small iron tongs he used for pinching hot horseshoes. It had come out clean. The wound had closed faster than any wound he had ever closed in any man. By the 8th day she could walk the length of the yard. By the 12th she could split kindling, slowly, with the small hatchet, her left hand pressed to her side only sometimes. By the 20th she split the kindling faster than he did. The child healed too, in the way children do, which is to say she grew. She grew in the small, secret, undramatic way of an infant kept warm and fed, a faint pinking under the grey shadow of her cheeks, a small new strength in the curl of her fingers around his thumb when he, in the 3rd week, finally dared to offer it. She did not cry often. When she did cry, it was a soft bird sound, not the sharp, clean cry of a human infant, but a lower, more chesty thing, like a small bellows. Mirka would lift her at once. Mirka would sing to her, very low, in a language Aldric did not know, a language that sounded like stones rolling slowly down a long slope into deep water. "What are the words?" he asked her one evening. They were sitting by the fire. The child was asleep in a basket Aldric had woven from osier, padded with the soft cloth from the market. Outside, the first true snow of the year was falling in slow vertical lines past the window. "It is a road song," Merca said. "An old one. We sing it to the small ones when we are walking with them on our backs. It tells them where their grandmother's bones are buried, so that they will know the way home." "And where are her grandmother's bones buried?" Merca did not answer. She looked into the fire. The fire put two small reflections of itself in her dark amber eyes, and for a long moment she looked very old and very young at the same time, and Aldric understood that he had asked the wrong question, or perhaps the only question, and that she would answer it when she was ready and not before. "You do not ask," she said at last, "what she is." "No." "Why?" He thought about it. He laid another piece of split ash on the fire. The new wood took the flames slowly, with a small hiss of sap. "Because," he said, "when I came back from the marches, the people of Aldworth asked me what I had seen. They asked me for 2 months. Then they stopped asking. They stopped because they did not want the answer, and I did not have the words. I learned then that asking can be a kind of stealing. So I do not ask. When you want to tell me, you will tell me. Until then, she is a child in a basket by my fire, and I am the man who feeds the fire." Merca was silent a long time. Then she said, "Aldric Fenn, you are not an ordinary man." "I am exactly an ordinary man," he said. "That is the only thing I am. I farm a hard piece of ground. I had a wife who died of the cough. I had a son who died after her. I have a goat that does not like me. There is nothing about me that is not ordinary. That," she said quietly, "is what I mean." She rose. She went to the basket. She lifted the child, who did not wake, and she carried her back to the bench, and she sat down with her, and she began to sing the road song again, very low. Outside, the snow fell. Inside, the fire burned. Aldric Fenn, ordinary man, sat in his ordinary chair and listened to an orc woman sing a half-orc infant to sleep in a language older than his country had a name in. And he understood without surprise that this was the happiest he had been since the year his son had died. And he understood also that this happiness was a debt, and that the debt would come due, and that he would pay it. She came on a grey afternoon in the first week of the deep cold. Aldric was in the lean-to, doctoring the goat, when he heard the knock. It was not a rider's knock, not the heavy fist of a man in mail. It was 3 small, patient taps, the knock of a person who has walked a long way and has nothing to prove. He came out of the lean-to, wiping his hands on his coat. Merca was already at the front window, the child against her chest, the short sword in her right hand. She looked at him through the watery glass. He held up one hand. "Wait." He went to the door. The woman on his step was old. Older than any orc he had ever seen in any of the stories. She was thin under a long, dark robe that had been worn so often the elbows had gone grey-white where the threads showed through. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, dark with broad streaks of silver. Her eyes were the colour of slate after rain. She was not armed. She was not even properly dressed for the cold. She had no cloak, only the long, thin robe, and over it a frayed grey woolen shawl. She held a walking staff of dark wood in her left hand. The other hand was empty, and turned palm out toward him. The way one shows a horse one means no harm. "Aldric Fenn," she said. Her voice was soft, and the Orcish accent in it was very old, the kind of accent you heard only in songs. "I have walked from the Duskroot Weald. I have walked 11 days. There is a young woman in your house, and a child. I am not here to take them. I am here because they cannot live in your house forever, and the path they must walk next will go through me. May I sit by your fire?" Aldric looked over his shoulder. Through the small front room, through the open door of the back room, he saw Merca. Merca had heard the old woman's voice. Merca's face had gone the colour of ash. The short sword in her right hand had lowered, slowly, until the point was resting on the floorboards. Aldric had not seen her face do that before, not in all the weeks. It was the face of someone who had been told, for the first time in a long time, that they were not alone. "Come in," "Mother," Aldric said. The old woman came in. She did not look at the sword on the table or at the basket by the hearth. She looked first, and only, at Merca. She crossed the room with a steadiness that the slowness of her step did not contradict. She stopped in front of Merca. She raised her free hand and she laid it, very lightly, against the side of Merca's face, the way an aunt might do, or a grandmother, or any old woman who has known a young woman since the young woman was a child and has feared for years that she would not see her grown. "Daughter of the Stone Hearth," she said, "daughter of Carver Varric, who was daughter of Corin the One-Eyed, you are alive. They told me you were not." "SERA!" Merca said. Her voice was raw. "SERA Duskwood! I did not come to you. I did not come to you because I did not want them to find your name in my mouth if they took me. I know it. Child, I know it. Sit down. Sit. Show me her." Merca sat. She uncovered the child. The old woman bent over the basket and she looked for a long time, and the breath went out of her in a small, slow shape, like steam off warm water. "It is true, then," she said. "It is true. All of it. All of it." The old woman straightened. She turned to Aldric. He had been standing by the door because he understood, without being told, that this was not his moment, that he was a witness to something the size of which he could not yet measure. The old woman's slate-grey eyes settled on him, and for the first time he felt the full weight of her age, and her grief, and her resolve. "Farmer," she said, "you have done a thing whose measure you do not know. Sit down, and I will tell you. You have earned that much. You have earned far more than that. But that, at least, I can give you tonight." He sat. Merca rocked the child, who was awake now, blinking up at the old woman with her dark amber eyes. The old woman, SERA Duskwood, drew the basket nearer to her knee. She took a small carved wooden horse from a pocket in her robe, a thing the length of her thumb, smooth from much handling, the kind of toy a grandmother carves for a child she has never met but has hoped to meet. And she set the horse very carefully on the edge of the basket, where the child's eyes could find it. Then she began to speak. "There was a clan," SERA Duskwood said. "It was called the Stone Hearth. It was not a large clan. It had never been a large clan. It lived in 3 high valleys at the south edge of the Duskroot Weald, where the mountains begin and the maps grow careless. It had lived there since before the time of the kings of your country, Farmer, since before there was a country." The fire popped. The child made a small sound and reached for the wooden horse with a slow, uncertain hand. SERA did not pause. It was a clan of healers and of road keepers. We did not war on our neighbours. We had a saying, "The warrior dies once, but the healer dies a little with every patient she cannot save." We chose to die a little. For 300 years we chose this. We were known by the human towns that bordered our valleys as the orcs you could trade with. We mended their broken bones at the high passes. We bought their flour. We sold them dyed wool. The arrangement was old. The arrangement was good. What happened to it? Aldric said. A man happened to it. A man who needed gold for an army, and who looked at our high valleys and saw silver in the rock, and remembered an old grant from a dead king that he could pretend had given him the land. He sent a private company. Not the king's men. A private company, because the king's men would not have done what he wanted done. Her voice did not change. The slate-grey eyes did not move from the fire. 2 months ago, they came in at night. They burned the high hall. They killed the chieftain, who was Merca's mother. They killed the chieftain's elder daughter, who was Merca's sister. They killed the chieftain's sister, who was the keeper of the bloodline rolls. They killed 84 people in a single night. I counted them. I counted them because I am old, and there was no one left who could count them but me. Aldric closed his eyes. He had been at Halford's Ford. He knew the arithmetic of nights like that. He had nothing to say. He kept his eyes closed because he did not want, just then, to look at Merca's face. 2 of us got out, SERA said. Merca, because she had been on the trade road with the child, 2 days' walk from the valley when the burning began. And me, because I am old and the smoke takes me slowly, and I crawled out the back of the hall, and I lay in the rye for a day and a half, and they did not find me. The chieftain of the Stone Hearth is now an infant in a basket in a farmer's kitchen. Her name, when she is named, will be Carver, after her grandmother. The lineage of the Stone Hearth, farmer, is the lineage of the road keepers of the South Passes. While there is one of us alive, the right to the high valleys does not pass to the man who burned the hall. While there is one of us alive, the burning is not finished. He knows this. That is why his riders are on every road from here to the Weald. He is not hunting an orc and a child. He is hunting the end of a story. The room was very still. Aldric opened his eyes. He looked at the basket. He looked at the wooden horse on the edge of it, and the small grey clay hand reaching for it. He thought of his own son, who would have been 3 this winter, and who had died of nothing in particular, only of being too small for the cold. He thought of the 40 crowns of silver the thin, red-bearded man had offered him. "What do you need from me, mother?" he said. "Time," SERA said. "We need time. A year, perhaps 2. The child must be old enough to travel hard. There are other clans, far to the north, who will take her when the time is right. They will hide her among their own children. She will grow. She will learn the songs. When she is grown, the old debts will be called in, and the high valleys will be reclaimed, and the man who burned the hall will answer, if not to her sword, then to her name. But for that, we need the time, and we need this house, and we need you." "You have the house," Aldric said. "You have me. You do not even ask what it will cost you." "No, mother, I do not." SERA Duskwood looked at him a long time. Then she did a thing that no orc had ever done to him, not in the marches, not anywhere. She bent her silver-streaked head, very slightly, in his direction, and she held it bent for the count of 3 breaths, and then she raised it again. "Then we will begin," she said. Merca, who had said nothing all this while, who had only sat with the child against her shoulder and listened to her own grief told back to her in another woman's voice, lifted her face at last and looked at Aldric across the fire, and her amber eyes were wet, and she did not look away, and he did not look away, and the 2 of them did not speak, because there was nothing left to say that the night had not already said for them. They came back on the morning of the deep frost, when the iron of the well handle stuck to the skin, and the rooks did not leave the dead oak. 5 riders this time. The thin, red-bearded man was at the front. He had brought a 6th horse with him, a riderless one, with a long rope coiled at the saddle. Aldric saw the rope from the lean-to, and he understood at once what it was for. It was for carrying a body home. They were not asking, this time. They were collecting. He had 10 breaths to think. He used them well. He stepped out of the lean-to with the small hatchet in his hand. Not raised, only carried, the way any man carried a tool at his work. And he walked toward them at the slow, steady pace of a farmer who has been interrupted at something tedious. He set the hatchet down on the chopping block when he reached the yard. He did not pick up anything else. Inside the house, he knew the back room door was closed. He knew that Merca was behind it, sitting on the floor with her back against the door and the short sword across her knees, and the child in the basket beside her. He knew that SERA was at the kitchen table, slowly stirring a pot of barley with one slow hand, the way an old farm wife would. He had planned all of this in the night, with both women, by the low fire, the way he had once planned an ambush in a frozen wood 10 years ago. He had been a corporal then. He was a corporal now. "My lord," he said. "Farmer," the thin man said. He did not dismount. "We have been to 7 houses on this road. We have found nothing. We have come back to yours. I am sorry to hear you found nothing, my lord. Are you? For your trouble, my lord, for your 40 crowns, the thin man smiled. It was not a smile. It was the small movement his mouth made before he asked the questions that did not have safe answers. "May we see your house?" "My lord," Aldric said. "There is a sick woman in my house. A sick woman." "My wife's sister. She came from the south country 2 weeks ago. Her husband died of the lung fever." She has it now. I have been keeping her in the back room. I burn juniper at the door morning and evening. I have not been to market since the 2nd week. The wool wife will tell you. I bought a length of soft cloth from her, and a paper of feverfew, and salt, and I did not stop at the inn. I did not stop at the inn, my lord, because I was afraid I would carry the cough to the men there. He said all of this slowly. He said it with the small hesitations of a man whose vocabulary had never been generous, who was working his way through a true and unhappy thing. He let his eyes flick once, sideways and down, at the chopping block, the way a guilty man would do, the way the thin, red-bearded man would expect a guilty man to do. And the thin man's eyes flicked with his, and saw nothing on the chopping block but the hatchet and a half-split log, and registered, without knowing it registered, that Aldric Fenn was the kind of guilty that hid nothing more interesting than embarrassment. Lung fever, the thin man said. Yes, my lord. The thin man looked at the 2 riders nearest him. Aldric watched the small currents of their faces. Lung fever was not a thing soldiers played with. Lung fever was what had killed half a company at Greylock Garrison the winter before last. The thin man's mouth went sour around the edges. You will let us see the back room from the door, he said. Not closer. From the door. My lord, Aldric said, and he let a small relief into his voice that he did not have to fake, because the relief was true. They had taken half the bait. Of course, my lord, of course. Come in. The front room is clean. I burn juniper. You will smell it. Come in. He led them into his house. 2 of the riders dismounted and came after him. The others stayed in the yard with the horses. SERA, at the table, did not look up. She stirred the barley with the slow uninterest of a woman whose ears had begun to fail her. The juniper, which Aldric had burned at first light, smelled sharp and bitter in the air. The thin, red-bearded man wrinkled his nose. Aldric walked to the back room door. He stopped 2 paces short of it. He did not touch it. He turned to face the thin man and his soldier, and he raised his voice, the small, careful raise that a man uses when he is speaking to a sick person through a door. Bessa, he called. Bessa, the Lord wants to see you for a moment from the door. He will not come in. He will not come close. Cover your face, sister, and answer him. There was a silence. Aldric's stomach turned over once, very slowly. Then, behind the door, in a voice that was Merkavarek's voice, but which Merkavarek had bent and broken into the shape of a sick human woman, a voice thin and ragged and wet, came the answer. I am here. I am sorry. I cannot rise. The cough is bad today. And then, perfectly timed, perfectly placed, perfectly Merka, a long, wet, racking cough behind the door, the kind of cough that empties a chest and leaves a person hanging over the edge of the bed for a slow minute afterward. The thin, red-bearded man took half a step back. His soldier took a full step. Aldric watched them. He did not let his face change. He had seen men do exactly this at Greylock, at the door of the sick hut, the small involuntary backward step, the small tightening of the mouth, the small calculation behind the eyes. 40 crowns is not worth the lung fever. 40 crowns is not worth the lung fever. 40 crowns is not worth the lung fever. That is enough, the thin man said. We have seen enough. Out, out, both of you, out of the house. They went out. Aldric followed them. He apologized in the yard. He apologized for the bother. He promised, again, to watch the road. He stood with his hat in his hand and his head bent slightly, and he was, again, the slow farmer with the slow farmer's greed who had been told there was 40 crowns in it. The thin, red-bearded man swung up onto his horse. He looked down at Aldric for a long, hard moment. If I find, he said softly, that you have lied to me, farmer, I will burn this house with you inside it. My lord, Aldric said, and his voice was steady. You would not be the first man to threaten that. I farmed through the marches. I am still here. The thin man's mouth moved, almost a smile, almost a respect. He turned his horse. The 5 riders went down the valley road, the empty horse with its coil of rope going with them, and Aldric Fenn stood in the cold yard until they were small as crows in the grey distance, and then he went inside, and he closed the door, and he sat down on the bench, and he put his face in his hands, and he did not weep, but he sat that way for a long time. When at last he raised his head, Mirka was standing in the door of the back room. The child was on her hip. Her amber eyes were dry. She crossed the floor to him, and she stood in front of him, and she said only, "You are a better liar than any orc I have ever known." "It is not lying," Aldric said, "when the thing you are protecting is the thing that should be protected. It is only farming. You drive the crows off the seed. That is all." She did not answer in words. She set the child down on the bench beside him. She bent down, slowly, and she pressed her forehead for a single breath against the top of his head, the way an orc presses her forehead to a sister's. Then she straightened, and she went back to the back room, and Aldric Fenn sat on his bench with a half-orc infant blinking up at him, and he understood that he was no longer, in any sense that the world had ever meant the word, an ordinary man. That night, after the child was asleep in the basket and Sarah had taken herself off to the small straw pallet in the corner of the back room, Mirka came out and sat with him by the fire. The wind had risen. The shutters knocked softly. The lamp had been turned low. Aldric was mending a leather strap from the goat's harness, slowly, by feel as much as by sight. He had not spoken in an hour. He did not need to. "Aldric Fenn," she said, "I have not told you why I gave you my sword. You did not have to tell me. I will tell you anyway, because you have earned it. Because if I die in this house someday, I want one person in the world to know it." He set the strap down. He did not look at her. He looked into the fire. He understood that this was how she could speak, with the fire between them, not the face. "On the trade road," she said, "the day the hall burned. I was 2 days out with the child. I did not know yet that the hall was burning. I knew only that the child had a small fever and would not nurse, and I was carrying her on my chest, and I was walking. I met a man on the road, a trader from Aldworth. He told me, while I bought a little soft cheese from him for myself, that he had seen smoke in the south, a great smoke, and that the talk was that the Company of the Silver Pin had finally taken the high valleys. He did not know who I was. He thought I was a road orc, a wandering one, with a wandering one's child. He was sorry, in a small, careful way, the way a man is sorry about weather. He gave me an extra piece of cheese. I thanked him. I walked on, and I did not weep. Do you understand me? I did not weep. I understand, Aldric said. I walked on, and I thought, while I walked, about what I would do. I was, a warrior of the Stone Hearth. I had been trained from the age of 6. I had killed 11 men in 3 skirmishes on the south passes when the bandits came up. I am very good with the short sword. I do not say this to boast. I say it because it matters to what I am telling you. I thought, while I walked, that I would turn south, that I would find the Company of the Silver Pin, that I would kill the thin, red-bearded man and as many of his soldiers as I could before they killed me. I thought of this for half a day. I held my daughter against my chest, and I thought of how I would do it. She paused. The fire popped. And then, she said, I thought of one more thing. I thought, who will carry the child while I do this? And there was no answer. The answer was no one. The answer was that if I went south with my sword in my hand, the child would die in a ditch, with me or without me. The bloodline would end. The high valleys would belong to the man who had burned them, and there would be no one alive who could say no. I would have killed a few of his men. I would have died well. And the story would have ended. She turned her face. Then she looked at him, and the amber light of the fire was in her eyes. I chose the other thing, she said. I chose the harder thing. I chose to be a coward. I chose to walk north instead of south, with my sword still on my hip but my heart already laid down. I chose to find a roof. Any roof. The first roof that would not give me up. I walked for 19 days. I knocked on no door. I slept in the rye, in the hedgerows, in the lee of stones. I bled. I starved. The child grew thinner. On the 20th day I came over the hill above your valley, and I saw the smoke of one chimney in a thin, cold dusk, and I saw a man standing in the doorway, drinking from a tin cup, looking at the road. And I thought, that man is alone. That man has lost something. That man might be the one. I had lost something, Aldric said. I saw it on you from the road. What did you see? The way you held the cup, as if it were heavier than it was. He looked into the fire. He felt his eyes burn, and he did not blink because he did not want her to know that they burned. The fire blurred. He let it blur. I gave you the sword, she said, because I had already decided on the road that the sword was no longer the thing that would save my clan. The sword had become the thing that would end it. If I had come to your door with the sword in my hand, you would have closed the door. You would have been right too. So I came with the sword in my palm, point to my own hand, hilt to you. I gave you the choice. You chose. And now I cannot take the sword back. Do you understand? I cannot take it back, Aldric Fenn, because if I take it back, I will be again the warrior of the Stone Hearth, and the warrior of the Stone Hearth has no daughter, and a clan with no daughter is a clan that the burning has finished. The fire burned. The shutters knocked. Then I will keep it, Aldric said, until you do not need to take it back. And on the day you need to take it back, I will give it to you, and not before. On that day, she said, you will not need to give it to me. I will simply lift it, because on that day, the danger will be at this door, and there will be no other hand to lift it. I will lift it with you, he said. She looked at him for a long time. She did not answer in words. She rose. She went to the basket. She lifted the sleeping child very gently, and she carried her back to the bench, and she sat down close beside him, not touching, but close. And the three of them sat together by the low fire while the wind worked at the shutters, and Aldric Fenn understood that something had been sworn in his house tonight that was older than the country he lived in, and he was not afraid. In the deepest weeks of the cold, when the snow had drifted to the tops of the field walls and the road below the farm was passable only by men on snowshoes, Aldric did a thing he had not planned. He cleaned out the old forge at the back of the lean-to. He had not used the forge in 2 years. His father had been the smith of the village before him. Aldric had learned the trade as a boy, then traded it for a soldier's coat, and after the soldier's coat had been taken away, he had come home to a forge that had grown a fine red coat of rust and a cold hearth full of mouse droppings. He had not had the heart, in 2 years, to wake it. He woke it now. He cleaned the bellows. He brought down the old hammer and the smaller hand hammer his father had used. He laid a new fire in the hearth, slowly, the old way, kindling, charcoal, until the hearth was a shape his hands remembered. He pumped the bellows. The coals took. The forge breathed, for the first time in 2 years, a slow red breath. SERA DUSKWOOD came out to watch him through the lean-to door. She stood there in her thin robe with the grey shawl over her shoulders, her staff in her hand, and she said nothing for a long while. "You are reforging the sword," she said at last. "I am." "Why?" "Because the sword she gave me," he said, without turning from the hearth, "is the sword of a warrior of the Stone Hearth. If the riders come back and they search the house properly, they will find it under the bench. They will know it. There is a mark on the pommel, a small mark, 3 lines crossed by 1, that I did not see until last week when I cleaned it. I have heard that mark spoken of. It is the chieftain's mark. It will hang us. So I will take the steel of the chieftain's sword, and I will fold it into something a farmer might own. A short, heavy blade for cutting cordwood and breaking ice. The mark will go. The steel will stay. When the day comes for the steel to be a sword again, the steel will be there to remember itself." SERA was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "There is an old practice in the Duskroot Weald. when a chieftain falls and the new chieftain is too young to lift the steel is unmade and remade as a tool, a plough coulter, a hoe, a small axe. It walks among the fields as a tool until the child is grown. When the child is grown, the smith of the clan unmakes the tool and remakes the sword and gives it back. The steel is the same steel. The mark, when struck back into the pommel, is the same mark. The lineage is unbroken. You did not know this practice, farmer. No, mother. And yet you have invented it again, this afternoon, in your own lean-to. He did not answer. He pumped the bellows. The coals went from red to white. He drew the short sword from the leather, and he laid the blade into the heart of the white coals, and he watched the dark steel begin, slowly, to remember the colour of fire. She watched him work for an hour. He did not speak again. He folded the steel. He drew it. He folded it again. The work was slower than he had remembered, his hands stiff with 2 years of being a farmer's hands, but the trade was in his bones, and his bones did not forget. By the 3rd hour, the blade was a different shape. Shorter, heavier, the curve of the cutting edge flattened almost to straight, a tool for splitting wet kindling and breaking the ice on a winter trough. By the 5th hour, the small mark on the pommel was gone. He had folded the pommel itself back into the tang. There was no sword left in his lean-to. There was a heavy, short hatchet, such as any small farmer might own. He took the hatchet inside. He laid it on the long pine table where the sword had lain the first night. Merca, who had been nursing the child by the fire, looked at it for a long time. She did not weep. She did not smile. She reached out and she set her hand flat upon the steel, and she closed her eyes, and she breathed in once, deeply, the way a person breathes the smell of a room they will not see again for many years, and then she opened her eyes and she nodded, once. "It is well," she said. "It is the same steel," Aldric said. He found that he needed to say it. "The same steel as before, Merca. Only the shape is changed. When the day comes, I will unmake the shape, and the steel will be there. I know it, farmer. I knew it before you began. I watched you all day from the window. That night, by the fire, SERA Duskwood lifted the child out of the basket. She lifted her up so that the firelight fell full upon the small grey clay face, and she said, 'On this night, in this house, under this fire, I name this child Carver of the Stone Hearth. Carver, daughter of Merca, daughter of Carver the Elder, daughter of Corin the One-Eyed, of the line of road keepers of the South Passes. I name her, and I bind her name to her, and I bind her bloodline to her, and I bind this house, and the man who keeps it, and the steel that sleeps within it, to her name from this hour forward. So it is spoken. So it is true.' She kissed the child's forehead. She set her back in the basket. The child opened her dark amber eyes, looked once at the fire, and went to sleep. Aldric Fenn, who had not been part of any naming since his own son's, sat very still on his bench, and he understood that he had been bound to something tonight that he would not be free of for the rest of his life, and he understood, too, that he had not been free of it since the first night, and he did not want any longer to be free. They came back in the 2nd month after the frost broke. They came on a wet evening, with the road soft and the snow melt running in the ditches and the rooks raucous on the dead oak. There were 8 of them this time. The thin, red-bearded man was not at the front. He was at the back. He had brought a man with him in a long black coat, a thin man with a thin, sharp face and a small ledger book in his hand. The man with the ledger was not a soldier. The man with the ledger was worse than a soldier. He was the kind of man who had been to 7 farms in the valley and had written down, in his small, precise hand, every cough and every lie and every careful silence, and had compared them, and had begun to understand the shape of what he was looking at. Aldric saw them from the lean-to. He understood, in the time it took to set down the hand-axe with which he had been splitting kindling, that there would not be lying this time. The ledger man had already lied too. The ledger man was not coming to be lied to again. The ledger man was coming to see, with his own eyes, the back room, and to write down what was in it. He went to the house. He did not run. He walked. "Merca," he said from the front room. "SERA, they are here. 8 of them, and a clerk." The 2 women were already moving. SERA had the basket in her hands. She lifted Carver, blanket and all, and she went straight to the back room and through it and to the small low door at the rear of the back room that opened on the kitchen garden, and beyond the kitchen garden on the steep wooded slope above the creek. Aldric had walked her the path twice in the past month. She knew it. She would take the child up the slope, into the rocks, into the small dry cleft where he had stacked dry kindling and 3 days of food and a heavy wool blanket. She would wait there until he came for her, or until he did not. Merca did not go with her. She went to the bench. She knelt down beside it. She put her hand under it. She drew out the heavy short hatchet that had been a sword, and she set it on the table, and she looked at Aldric across the table the way she had looked at him on the first night, with her amber eyes steady and her face set, and she said, "It is time, farmer. Unmake the shape." "There is no time," he said. "There is no time for the forge, but there is time for the hand. Lift it, Aldric Fenn. Lift it with me. You said you would." He lifted it. The heavy hatchet sat in his hand. It was a tool. He had reshaped it himself. He had made it a tool with his own hands in his own lean-to in the dead of winter. And yet, and he never afterward understood this, though Sarah Duskwood, when he told her of it later, did not seem surprised. And yet, in his hand, in that moment, with the sound of 8 horses coming up the yard, the tool remembered what it had been. It did not change shape. The mark did not return to the pommel. But the weight of it, the balance of it in his hand, the cold particular willingness of it, these became, between one breath and the next, the weight and the balance and the willingness of a sword. And Merca took up the small kindling axe from the corner by the door, and she balanced it in her palm, and she nodded to him once, and they went out together into the yard. The 8 riders had not yet dismounted. The clerk was just opening his ledger. The thin, red-bearded man was looking past Aldric, toward the open front door of the house, toward the back room beyond, and his eyes were narrow, and his mouth was a thin line. "Farmer," he began, "we are going to look in your back He did not finish. He did not finish because Merca Varick, of the Stone Hearth, who had laid down her sword on a stranger's table in the rain 4 months ago, and had not lifted a weapon since, moved. She moved the way a stone moves when it falls. There was no warning in her body. There was no shifted weight, no drawn breath, no warning at all. Only the small kindling axe leaving her hand in a single flat motion and finding the throat of the led rider at the front of the column, and her body crossing the yard before the rider had finished falling, and the heavy thrown hatchet that Aldric Fenn pressed into her hand without thinking. The steel he had reforged, the steel that was, in this moment, again what it had always been, finding the chest of the second rider through the gap in his mail. It was very quick. Aldric, who had been at Harford's Ford, did not remember it well afterward. He remembered shouting. He remembered the third rider's horse going down on its side in the mud of the yard and rolling, and a leg being trapped, and Merca standing over the rider with the hatchet in both hands. He remembered the clerk dropping the ledger and turning his horse and trying to go, and not getting 15 paces before Merca took him too, with a thrown stone of all things, a stone from the yard, a stone she had been waiting to throw all winter. He remembered the thin, red-bearded man, last of them, drawing his sword and meeting Merca in the muddy middle of the yard, and he remembered the small, fixed quiet that came over her face, the quiet of a woman who had been promised, for 4 months, a single specific person, and had not been allowed to ask. He remembered, also, that he himself had not been useless. He had lifted his old discharged soldier's sword from behind the front door, and he had taken one rider from the side, and he had fought another to a tired, panting standstill, until Merca had finished with the thin, red-bearded man, and had crossed the yard and had finished, very quickly, the man Aldric was fighting. When it was over, the yard was a thing he could not look at for some time. 8 horses still stood, some of them riderless. The thin, red-bearded man lay on his back in the mud with his eyes open to the wet evening sky, and his thin red beard wet now with something darker than rain. The clerk's ledger had fallen open. The wind turned the pages slowly. Mirka stood in the middle of it all, breathing, the hatchet, the sword. At her side, blood up to her elbow on her right arm. She looked at Aldric. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a long time. Then she walked to him. She set the hatchet, very gently, into his open hand. She closed his fingers around the haft. She said, "Tomorrow morning you will put it back into the shape of the tool, and we will go on living in this house. Do you understand me, Aldric Fenn?" He understood her. He understood her so completely that he could not speak. He only nodded, and he held the steel, and somewhere up the wet wooded slope above the creek, an old orc woman with slate-grey eyes was sitting in a dry cleft of rock with a half-orc infant against her chest, singing a road song in a language older than the country they lived in, waiting for a tall warrior and a thin farmer to come up the slope and tell her that the night, for now, was over. They buried the 8 men, with the help of 2 days, in the deep wood behind the farm. They turned the horses loose at the head of the valley road, where the village herd boys would find them in the morning and take them, with great excitement and great profit, to the inn at Aldworth. They burned the ledger. They scrubbed the yard with 3 barrels of water and a stiff brush. By the 3rd day there was no sign in Aldric Fenn's yard that anything had ever happened there, but the slow, ordinary business of a farmer's spring. The forge in the lean-to burned again on the 4th night. Aldric reshaped the hatchet, slowly and carefully, into the shape it had worn before. The heavy short tool for splitting wet kindling, the workmanlike thing a small farmer might own. The steel did not protest. The steel never had. It had only ever done what it was asked to do. He laid the reshaped hatchet on the pine table when it was cool, and Mirka set her palm on it again, the way she had the first time, and she breathed in once, and she nodded, and she said, "It is well." There were inquiries, of course, in the months that followed. A clerk had gone missing. A captain of the Silver Pin had gone missing. 8 horses had appeared, without men, in the high pasture above the village. The inn at Aldworth filled, for a time, with riders in dark cloaks asking quiet questions. None of them came up the valley road as far as Aldric Fenn's farm. The thin, red-bearded man, before he had died, had told no one where his last search would take him. The ledger man's small, precise handwriting had burned to grey ash in a farmer's hearth. The trail ended at the 7th farm down the road, and the 7th farmer, a slow old man with a slow old wife, had nothing to tell them, because there was nothing he could tell them. After a while, the riders stopped coming. The Silver Pin Company was disbanded the following year, when its paymaster fell out of favour at a far court for reasons that had nothing to do with any of this. The lord who had wanted the high valleys for their silver died of a colic in the summer of the 2nd year, leaving no son, leaving the grant in dispute. The high valleys went, for a long time, to nobody. In Aldric Fenn's small stone house, the years passed. Carver of the Stone Hearth grew. She grew first into a wobbling child with grey clay skin and dark amber eyes who chased the goat around the yard and would not be told no. She grew then into a longer-legged girl who could be sent to the well and back without spilling the bucket, who learned her letters from Aldric on slow winter evenings, who learned the orc road songs from SERA and could sing them in her own small, clear voice by the time she was 6. She grew, by the time she was 9, into a child who knew, because she had been told plainly and from the beginning exactly who she was. The chieftain's daughter of the Stone Hearth, the last of a road-keeper's line, raised in hiding in a farmer's house in the Aldworth Valley because her grandmothers had been killed in a burning. She did not weep about it. She did not boast about it. She carried it the way she carried the wooden horse SERA had given her at 3 days old, as a thing in her pocket, always present, never displayed. Mirka stayed. There was no question by the end of the 1st year that she would stay. The The village of Aldworth came to know her, slowly, as Bessa, Aldric's wife's sister from the south country. The lung fever had passed. She had recovered. She had nowhere else to go. She had been useful at the farm. She had stayed. There was talk the first year. There was always talk. The woolwife in particular liked to say, in a low voice over her counter, that Bessa was a strange-looking woman, very tall, very dark-skinned, very strong, who never came to market with her hood quite down. The talk did not become more than talk. Aldric Fenn was a quiet man who paid his small debts and asked no favours, and the Aldworth Valley had its own old practice of leaving quiet men alone. SERA DUSKWOOD stayed 3 years. In the 4th year, on a soft spring morning, she did not wake. They buried her under the dead oak at the field's edge, and Carver, who was 4, laid the small wooden horse on the grave and did not cry. And Mercer and Aldric, who were no longer the people they had been the night of the rain, stood on either side of the small grave and held Carver's hands between them, and the rooks in the dead oak quarrelled themselves into silence. There came an evening, 11 years after the night of the rain, when a tall young woman with grey clay skin and dark amber eyes, and the first beginnings of 2 ivory points in her lower jaw, came into the lean-to where Aldric was working at the forge, and stood beside him for a long while watching him work, and at last said, very quietly, "Father, Mother says it is time. Mother says that next spring she and I will go north, to the clans of the high snows. Mother says I am old enough now to travel hard. Mother says that the steel under the bench should be the steel of the sword again before we go. Mother says that you will know how to do it." Aldric Fenn, who was not young anymore, who had not lifted a soldier's sword in a yard against 8 riders since the night of the wet evening 11 springs ago, who had been called father by this tall young woman every day for as long as either of them could remember, and had still not quite gotten used to the music of it, set down his hammer. He turned to her. He looked at her a long time. "I will know how to do it," he said. "I will start tomorrow. The unmaking is slower than the making. It will take a week." Mother says a week is well. Carver. "Yes, Father. When you go north in the spring, you will write, I will write, and you will come back someday. When the high valleys are ready, I will come back. I will bring my mother, and I will bring the sword, and I will lay it on this table the way she once laid it, and I will ask you to keep it again, because this is the house of the steel," Mother told me. She told me on my 8th birthday. She said, "There is one house in the world where the steel of the Stone Hearth has slept twice. Wherever the steel goes after, it will go from there." Aldric Fenn turned his face away. He pretended to look at the fire in the forge. He was not a man who wept easily, and he had not wept in many years, and he was not going to begin now in front of his daughter. The forge breathed. The coals went from red to white. Somewhere in the front room, an orc warrior who was no longer in hiding, who was simply a woman of the house, was singing, very low, an old road song to herself while she kneaded bread. And the song told the daughters of the road keepers where their grandmother's bones were buried, so that they would know the way home. Aldric Fenn understood, at last, what the night of the rain had been. It had not been a stranger at his door. It had not been a sword on his table. It had not even, in the end, been a child in a basket. It had been the world, in the only way the world ever spoke to a man like him, asking him a single question with no words attached, and waiting in the rain to see what he would answer. He had answered yes. He took up the hammer again. He laid it gently against the steel. He began the slow work of unmaking the tool, and remaking the sword, and giving back to the bloodline of the Stone Hearth the shape it had been promised, on a wet evening in a yard full of 8 horses, by an orc warrior who had once knelt in his mud and laid her blade across her open palm and trusted, against every reason in the world, that he would understand. He had understood. He had understood from the first breath of the child in the cloak. He had only needed the years to say it. The forge breathed. The steel began to remember. And outside, beyond the lean-to, beyond the yard, Beyond the road that had once brought riders, and never would again, the long valley of Aldworth lay quiet under a soft spring sky, holding within it, without ever quite knowing, a secret older than the country it belonged to, a secret carried for 11 winters in the hands of a discharged corporal and a road-keeper's daughter and an old scholar under, a dead oak, a secret now grown tall enough to carry itself. The bloodline lived. The hall would, one day, be rebuilt. And the steel, when it left the small stone house at the end of the valley road the following spring, would leave in the hand of a chieftain.